Welcome to the year 2124. If you're watching this in the 21st century, you should know that time travel is just around the corner. So, get excited. This is Morgan, your typical big city resident collecting their weekly mail, startled to find a letter that all citizens will eventually receive. Dear resident, you've been selected to serve on a jury of your peers in a legal proceeding being settled at an undisclosed time and location. You will receive details of the case upon arrival and will have no understanding of where you are going at any point during your summons. Please report to the Domestic Time Embassy in your local jurisdiction at 9 a.m. on September 25th, 2124. The Summons Bureau, not to be confused with the Summons Bureau. There sure are a lot of typos in this official memorandum. September 25th, but that's tomorrow. What about the plans Morgan had made? They'd have to wait. Jury duty. What a joke. Morgan awoke the next morning prepared to board the city bus. Born in 2086, Morgan is part of Generation Epsilon, and like most others in their age bracket, cannot afford a vehicle of their own. The Time Embassy was located at the far end of the city, past the restaurants and businesses, and through the residential centres. Like most innovations from steam engines to personal computers, time travel has transformed every industry it's touched, though it's played a particularly interesting role for the federal government, as you're about to see. Morgan arrived at the Time Embassy, where the offices were abuzz with the comings and goings of routine work. The signs on the wall were confusing, but straightforward, and after a brief security check, Morgan was allowed access to the waiting area. Only a few moments had gone by when Morgan was greeted by a woman designated their time liaison. She was a middle-aged woman talking a mile a minute, with a stern yet inoffensive disposition that spoke to the pressure she was under. Morgan was likely her 20th appointment of the morning, and it was only 9. She welcomed them to the embassy and explained the basics of jury duty. After a brief overview, Morgan was granted access to the final corridor leading to the jury room. The jury room was dark and cold, save for a glowing light straight ahead. It was a door to the future. Morgan stepped carefully through the doorway when suddenly they were transported to another place and time. The year 2486 was far more advanced than the era from which Morgan came. Scientists worked on machines and projects Morgan had never seen before. And the world outside, finally, flying cars. Morgan continued their walk toward the courtroom, where they proceeded to wait. And wait. And wait. Until finally, the jury was called to attention. The courtroom was sparsely populated, with only a few men in suits and the bailiff in attendance, as well as the other 5 members of Morgan's jury. The bailiff directed the gallery to be silent and asked the jurors to rise as Judge Elijah Weaver entered from his chambers. Judge Weaver was an extremely well-known man in his time, and regarded by many as the only person qualified to hear a case of such magnitude. That case was the one against Archibald Druthers Moseley III, a 13th generation heir to the Druthers political dynasty, and a man on trial for the murder of his father, former President Archibald Druthers Moseley Jr. The Druthers family has been in power since the time of the previous United States, before the era of the unified provinces of America. 3 presidents, 2 ambassadors, 4 judges, and now a murderer. There was nobody on earth who didn't know the Druthers family, that is, except the 6 people in the jury box. The trial began like any other. Though the flags and maps had changed, the law had not, and Archibald Druthers was afforded a fair trial for his would-be crime. Morgan and their fellow jurists listened to the defense attorney and prosecutor trade monologues for hours. Having no background on the parties involved was a blessing and a curse, and proved troublesome when attempting to assess the better nature of the defendant. But that was the point of a time-traveling jury after all. Completely unbiased impartiality. As both sides finished their arguments, it befell the jury to fulfill their end of the bargain. They retreated to the deliberation room where Morgan was elected foreperson. They'd all been drafted from various months within the same 2-year window as Morgan, equally unaware of the all-powerful Druthers family. Free of political proclivities and social leanings, they could only judge the case based on the facts before them, which, as it happened, were not many. The case was built on second-hand conversations and circumstantial evidence. But was that enough? The jury returned within a few hours, and the trial commenced toward conclusion. Judge Weaver asked Morgan if they'd reached a unanimous verdict, then instructed Archibald Druthers Moseley III to stand so that he may hear his judgment. Not guilty. There simply wasn't enough evidence. With a groan from the men in the crowd, former Secret Service agents Morgan later learned, Druthers was set free. As Morgan travelled the same halls from whence they first arrived, they couldn't help but hear the angry grumblings from personnel as they passed. Druthers was a monster, one said. Everyone in that family has blood on their hands, whispered another. Had the jury made a mistake? Morgan hadn't the time to be haunted by such questions as they neared the portal to 2124. Back in their own time, everything appeared immediately antiquated. Things moved slower. At least it seemed that way. Morgan began feeling better about the trial after boarding the city bus, and felt at peace as they moved through town. By the time they arrived home, they'd stopped thinking about the case and the trial, and had all but forgotten the name. Druthers.